CBS Young and the Restless Spoilers. The long and bitter rivalry between Jack Abbott and Victor Newman had always been one of those eternal conflicts that defined not only their lives, but also the very identity of Genoa City. More than 3 decades had passed since the first time Victor set his sights on destroying Jabbett, and though fortunes, marriages, and companies had risen and fallen, one thing never changed: Victor's insatiable hunger to conquer and crush Jack. It was a need as primal as breathing for him, an obsession that transcended business and became a personal crusade. Jack, on the other hand, was no saint, but his motivation had always carried a different weight. He didn't wake up every morning dreaming of Victor's downfall the way Victor did of his. Instead, Jack lived for Jabbett, for the Abbott legacy, for preserving the memory of John Abbott and ensuring the family company remained in Abbott hands. Jack had spent years learning that Victor's attacks were inevitable, that his rival would never relent. And so Jack's energy was devoted not to endless revenge, but to measured retaliation. String back when the Newman claws came too close, holding his ground when Victor's shadow loomed too darkly over his family. It was a survival instinct rather than a blood feud, and yet, despite their different motivations, the war between them stretched on relentlessly, consuming decades and drawing countless others into its orbit. But the present moment was different. The ground beneath their war-torn battlefield was shifting, and in Genoa City whispers had begun to spread of an impending explosion. One not of dynamite, but of betrayals, alliances, and shifting loyalties. At the center of it was Nikki Newman, long considered the backbone of Victor's empire, the woman who had endured his temper, his arrogance, his power games, and his infidelities, yet who had always somehow found herself circling back to him, tethered by a strange mixture of love, fear, and habit. But Nikki had grown weary of being chained to a man she increasingly saw as unhinged. The Victor of her youth had been commanding, dangerous, intoxicating, but the Victor of today seemed consumed by delusions of grandeur, obsessed with enemies real and imagined, determined to bend the world into his twisted sense of order. Nikki no longer wished to live under the shadow of an aging tyrant. She began to see Jack not as a rival to her husband, but as a friend, perhaps even a savior of sorts, someone who could finally help her step out from Victor's suffocating grasp. To the rest of the Newman family, this shift was nothing short of treason. Nikki was branded a traitor to her bloodline, a woman who would dare stand against the patriarch who had built their empire. But to Nikki, it was liberation, the first breath of fresh air after decades of suffocation. She knew what Victor was capable of. She had watched him ruin lives with a single stroke of his pen or a whisper in the right ear, and she could no longer ignore the madness in his eyes. Aligning herself with Jack was a gamble, but to Nikki, it was the only way forward. Yet, in the shadows of this fragile new alliance, another figure lurked with her own ambitions and insecurities. Diane Jenkins had clawed her way back into Jack's life, once reviled and distrusted, but now standing at his side with a level of trust and power she could scarcely have dreamed of years earlier. Jack had made her a cornerstone of his world, granting her influence within Jabbett, giving her responsibilities, and trusting her loyalty in ways that astonished everyone who remembered her past betrayals. For Diane, this trust was intoxicating, yet it also sowed the seeds of fear and jealousy. Watching Jack and Nikki forge a bond, even one born of strategic necessity, lit a fire of resentment within her. Diane did not want Jack turning to another woman, especially not Nikki, whose history with Jack carried a tenderness Diane could never fully erase. Beneath her polished surface, Diane felt threatened, her position endangered by Nikki's ability to remind Jack of a softer, more idealistic version of himself. That jealousy festered, twisting into darker thoughts, until Diane did the unthinkable. She reached out to Victor. The very man who had spent a lifetime trying to annihilate Jack became Diane's clandestine confidant. Secret meetings, whispered exchanges, covert handoffs. Diane began slipping pieces of information out of Jabbett's inner sanctum and into Victor's waiting hands. The most damning of these were documents, files, and evidence Jack had painstakingly gathered to shield Jabbett from hostile takeovers and legal entanglements. These papers, meant to safeguard the Abbott legacy, now found themselves funneled straight to his sworn enemy, courtesy of the woman Jack had chosen to trust above all others. But Diane was no mere errand girl in this arrangement. She wanted something in return, and she made sure Victor understood that her betrayal was transactional. The question, however, was what Diane truly sought. Did she desire power, more influence than Jack could ever grant her? Perhaps even a seat at the Newman table where she could wield authority beyond Jabbett's walls? Or was it money and insurance policy for herself and her son, a fortune secured by aligning with the most ruthless businessman in town? Some whispered it was neither, that Diane's motives were driven instead by insecurity, by a twisted need to ensure Nikki could never succeed in supplanting her in Jack's heart. By giving Victor the ammunition to weaken Jack, Diane was playing a dangerous double game, appearing as Jack's devoted partner while secretly feeding his greatest enemy. The risk was astronomical, for if Jack ever discovered the truth, her carefully rebuilt life would collapse in an instant, leaving her more despised than ever before. Victor, of course, thrived on this kind of betrayal. To him, Diane's duplicity was proof of his unmatched ability to corrupt even the closest allies of his rivals. But even he was not blind to the potential instability of such a partnership. Victor had used people like pawns his entire life, and he knew that Diane's loyalty to him was shallow at best, built on desperation and jealousy rather than genuine allegiance. Still, the advantage she gave him was undeniable. With Diane's information, Victor could dismantle Jack's defenses piece by piece, striking at Jabbett with precision rather than brute force. For a man who had spent decades battering against Jack's fortress, Diane's treachery offered a new pathway to victory. Meanwhile, Jack stood unknowingly at the edge of a precipice. He believed in Diane, believed that her redemption was genuine, that the years of struggle and scandal had taught her humility and loyalty. He leaned on her not only professionally, but emotionally, seeing in her a partner who finally understood him after years of loneliness and disappointment. He had no idea that the very foundation of his trust was riddled with cracks, that each time he handed her another responsibility at Jabbett, she turned around and delivered its secrets to his mortal enemy. The tension in Genoa City mounted with every passing day. Nikki's quiet rebellion against Victor threatened to ignite open war within the Newman family, with children and allies forced to choose sides. Diane's secret betrayal threatened to shatter the Abbott family from within, not with Victor's direct assault, but with the slow poison of disloyalty. And Victor himself, older, but no less dangerous, sharpened his claws with glee, knowing that his enemies were unraveling themselves without him even having to lift a finger. The question on everyone's lips was what Diane truly wanted in return for her treachery. Some speculated she demanded that Victor clear a path for her son Kyle, securing his future in ways Jack never could. Others whispered that Diane's ambition reached high earth, that she wanted control over Jabbett itself, perhaps as a queen placed on the throne by Victor's hand, ruling the Abbott empire while Jack was left broken and betrayed. And a few, more cynical still, believed Diane wanted something simpler, yet more cruel: the destruction of Nikki's alliance with Jack, ensuring that no other woman could come between her and the man she claimed to love. Whatever her true motive, one truth was undeniably: Diane had set a chain of events in motion that could not be stopped, and when the explosion finally came, it would not only rock Jabbett and Newman Enterprises, but also tear apart the fragile web of relationships holding Genoa City together. Jack had faced betrayal before, but never had it cut so deeply or struck so savagely at the core of who he was as a man, a husband, and a guardian of his family's legacy. When he walked into that room and froze at the sight of Victor Newman and Diane Jenkins exchanging confidential documents that belonged to Jabbett, his world seemed to collapse around him in a single heartbeat. The sight alone would have been enough, but then came the words, the damning evidence carried by the sound of their voices. He stood in silence, every nerve in his body seared with rage, listening to the poisonous conversation unfold, listening as Victor congratulated Diane for her duplicity, and as Diane, trembling but resolute, handed over the proof of her treachery. In that instant, Jack's belief in redemption, in loyalty, in the possibility of forgiveness for the mistakes of the past, shattered beyond repair. He realized he had given Diane something precious: power, and the mantle of Abbott responsibility, and she had twisted it into a weapon aimed at his heart. The disappointment was a tidal wave, crashing over him with relentless force, leaving him unable to breathe, unable to think, only able to stand rooted to the ground as the reality sank in. His wife, the woman he had defended against critics and family skeptics alike, had become the very thing they all warned him she would be: a traitor. The sting of betrayal was magnified by the intimacy of their bond. For it was not simply a business partner who had sold him out, but the woman he had taken into his home, into his family, into his bed. That intimacy made the treachery unforgivable. Diane had not only betrayed Jabbett, she had betrayed him. When Jack finally stepped from the shadows and revealed himself, the blood drained from Diane's face, and for the first time, she seemed to comprehend the enormity of what she had done. She begged for forgiveness, stumbling through explanations, trying desperately to recast her betrayal as a moment of weakness, a mistake born of fear or jealousy. But the more she spoke, the more venomous her words became, for each excuse only revealed another layer of selfishness, another glimpse into the manipulations that had guided her choices. Jack listened, but the sound of her voice no longer touched him as it once had. What had once been the voice of reconciliation and redemption now rang hollow, shrill, and unworthy of trust. Each attempt at justification only deepened the disgust in his eyes, until finally Diane understood that her pleas were not softening his resolve, but hardening it into stone. For Jack, there was no way back. Diane was no longer a partner, no longer a wife, no longer an Abbott. The family she had fought so hard to be part of now cast her out, not in a moment of quiet separation, but in a declaration of enmity. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, placing herself squarely among the enemies of the Abbott name. And in that decision, Jack found both clarity and sorrow. Clarity, because he now saw Diane for what she truly was, a woman incapable of change, incapable of choosing love over self-interest. Sorrow, because despite his anger, he had wanted to believe she could rise above her past, that together they could forge a new legacy. That dream lay in ruins now, replaced by a cold battlefield where love had once lived. Victor, meanwhile, had orchestrated his game with precision, and as Jack confronted Diane, the Newman patriarch allowed himself the luxury of triumph. He had wanted to break Jack, to strip him of both professional security and personal trust, and Diane's betrayal had achieved that in ways even Victor could not have scripted. Standing with his trademark smugness, Victor watched Jack's world collapse, savoring the pain etched across his rival's face. Yet in the same breath, Victor revealed his true nature once more. For all his boasting of loyalty and alliances, Victor Newman cared for no one but himself. Diane, who had risked everything to hand him the keys to Jabbett's secrets, discovered that she was not a partner to Victor, but a disposable pawn. The moment her usefulness was exhausted, Victor turned his back on her without hesitation. He dismissed her, discarded her, left her in Jack's fury like a broken toy cast aside by a spoiled child. His laughter echoed as he walked away, that cruel smile spreading across his face as he disappeared into the night, leaving chaos in his wake. Jack was left to absorb the double-blow treachery of the woman he had trusted and the mockery of the man who had haunted his life for decades. The humiliation was profound, but within that pain, a new fire began to kindle. Jack Abbott had been betrayed, but he was not defeated. Victor had scored a victory, yes, but by abandoning Diane in the open, he had also revealed a weakness. Victor had shown himself not only as a ruthless tactician, but as a man willing to discard anyone, even those who aided him, without a second thought. In doing so, he left Diane broken and desperate, a woman stripped of allegiance, unwanted by either side. Jack understood that this too was a weapon, though one he would wield differently. For now, he had no desire to hear another word from Diane, no patience for her tears or her pleas. She was cast out, officially and irrevocably, a traitor to his home, his family, and his legacy. The consequences rippled outward almost immediately. The Abbott family, already wary of Diane, now regarded her with open contempt, their suspicions vindicated in the worst way. Jabbett, still reeling from years of battles with Newman Enterprises, faced another looming war, this time with its defenses compromised by stolen secrets. And Jack himself stood at a crossroads, his faith in love and redemption shattered, his trust in allies diminished, his rage at Victor burning hotter than ever before. Yet through the devastation, one thing remained certain. The war between Jack Abbott and Victor Newman was far from over. It had been rekindled with new ferocity, its flames fanned by betrayal and humiliation, and Genoa City would once again be forced to bear witness as these two titans clashed. Victor retreated into the shadows, triumphant yet calculating, already plotting his next move. But Jack was not the man he had been decades ago. He had endured too much, lost too much, and he understood now that every betrayal only sharpened his resolve. Diane's treachery had wounded him, but it had also clarified his mission. There would be no more second chances, no more misplaced trust. Jack Abbott was ready to fight, and this time, the war would not end until one empire was truly left in ashes.